David John Gilmour was born on March 6, 1946, in Cambridge, England, the son of Douglas and Sylvia Gilmour, a couple of academics who lived not in the glamorous world of artists and rock stars but in the quiet routines of study and science. His father worked in zoology, his mother in education, and the environment of his childhood was intellectually stimulating but not particularly musical. Yet, somewhere in the house, young David found his world vibrating with a strange pull to its sound, and before long, the boy who seemed quiet, reserved, and almost enviable in classrooms began carrying with him the invisible fire of music. From a young age, the guitar became his companion, his weapon, his tool to say the things his mouth could not say. He did not crave the noise of popularity, nor the spotlight of being the center of attention. His gift was subtlety, and though the world didn't yet know it, he was destined to use that subtlety to carve some of the most emotional, timeless, and immortal sounds in rock history. As a teenager, David was fascinated by American blues musicians, listening endlessly to Led Belly, B.B. King, and other masters who had the ability to pour their soul into every note. He began practicing obsessively, learning not by rigid study but by feel, by trial, by listening and repeating until the guitar became an extension of his own thoughts. His parents, supportive but pragmatic, didn't entirely understand the depth of his devotion, but David himself felt it. Music was not a hobby, it was survival. By his late teens, he was playing in small groups, one of them called Joker's Wild, which did the usual pub circuits and even managed to record a few tracks that never quite broke through. Those days were filled with cigarette smoke, long nights, broken equipment, and the hunger of chasing a dream that always felt just out of reach. His friends went off to university or jobs, but David busked on the streets of Paris, barely earning enough to eat. Thin and gaunt but stubbornly clutching his guitar, singing on sidewalks and surviving on coins. At times, his health collapsed, his weight dropped, and he questioned whether this path would lead anywhere but ruin. Yet something in him refused to quit. He believed in the guitar more than he believed in life itself. Meanwhile, back in Cambridge, a group of his old acquaintances, Roger Waters, Syd Barrett, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright, were forming a band called Pink Floyd. Their music was psychedelic, strange, experimental, a swirl of lights and madness that captured the underground London scene. For a while, David was simply an admirer from the outside, watching their meteoric rise while he struggled to survive in obscurity. Syd Barrett, the genius of that group, was the shining star. Barrett's eccentric writing, wild presence, and strange charisma made Pink Floyd explode. But as fast as he rose, Syd fell. LSD and mental illness pulled him into chaos, his behavior becoming erratic, his mind unraveling, and the band teetered on the edge of collapse. It was during this fragile period, in 1968, that fate tapped David on the shoulder. They needed someone who could play guitar with stability, someone who could hold the music together as Syd spiraled away. The call came: would he step in, not to replace, but to rescue? When David Gilmour entered Pink Floyd, he carried not flamboyance but steadiness. His guitar was lyrical, almost vocal, able to cry, to scream, to whisper, to float. While others shredded with speed, David sculpted notes with patience, letting silence breathe between phrases, creating emotions out of restraint. The early years were difficult. Fans still loved Syd, and critics doubted the band could survive. But slowly, with albums like Meddle and Atom Heart Mother, the band began finding a new identity. David's voice blended with Roger Waters, in a haunting contrast, Gilmour's smooth, melodic warmth against Waters' sharp, cutting edge. His solos became stories in themselves, and though he was quiet off stage, on stage he commanded entire arenas without moving much at all, just closing his eyes and letting the guitar sing. By 1973, Pink Floyd released Dark Side of the Moon, and the world shifted. It was not just an album, it was a phenomenon, a cultural landmark, selling millions, staying on charts for years, and redefining what music could be. David's fingerprints were all over it, the soaring vocals on Time, the haunting guitars on Money, the otherworldly slide work on Breathe. The success was dizzying. From small clubs to sold-out stadiums, Pink Floyd became one of the biggest bands on earth. Yet, with success came shadows. Roger Waters' leadership grew increasingly authoritarian. While David contributed immensely to the sound, the credit often tilted toward Waters. By the time they recorded Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall, the tension had become unbearable. Waters dominated direction, often dismissing or sidelining input, while Gilmour, though still crafting legendary guitar lines, often found himself pushed to the margins. It was humiliating for a man whose very notes carried the soul of the band. The Wall, released in 1979, was both a masterpiece and a breaking point. On one hand, David contributed one of the greatest guitar solos in history, Comfortably Numb, a piece so tranced and in that it has been described as the voice of God through 6 strings. On the other hand, the recording process was filled with hostility. By the early 1980s, Richard Wright had been forced out, and the band dynamic was fractured beyond repair. Waters, convinced he was the sole visionary, eventually left the band in 1985, declaring Pink Floyd finished. He sued Gilmour and Mason, mocking their attempt to carry on without him, publicly belittling David's abilities, and suggesting that Pink Floyd could never survive without his presence. The press echoed those doubts. Critics predicted disaster. For David, it was a public humiliation, a challenge to his very identity. Was he merely a sidekick, a shadow, or could he step into the light? The answer came with action, not words. In 1987, it led Pink Floyd into a new era with a momentary lapse of reason. It was not universally praised at first, critics were harsh, fans divided, but the world came anyway. Stadiums filled, millions attended, and the band proved it was not dead. David's voice and guitar carried the shows, majestic and commanding. Then, in 1994, The Division Bell arrived, an album soaked in introspection and lyrical depth, with soaring melodies that bore Gilmour's unmistakable mark. By this point, it was clear, Pink Floyd without Roger Waters could not only survive, it could still conquer. It was David's quiet revenge, not through bitterness or insult, but through success, through the undeniable power of sound. His guitar did all the talking. Critics who once mocked now bowed. The doubters were silenced not with anger but with beauty. Outside of Pink Floyd, David also pursued solo work, albums like David Gilmour 1978, About Face 1984, On an Island 2006, and Rattle That Lock 2015, each reflecting his more personal, reflective side. On an Island, in particular, revealed a man older, wiser, yet still pouring emotion into every note, achieving #1 status in the UK. He became not just a rock star but an elder statesman of music. Respected for his artistry, admired for his humility, never chasing trends but always true to his own sound. His personal life also had its ups and downs. His first marriage, to Virginia Hassembane, brought 4 children but eventually ended in divorce. Later, he married Polly Samson, novelist and lyricist, whose words inspired much of The Division Bell and On an Island. Together they built not just a life but an artistic partnership, a bond that deepened his creative world. David, known for his generosity, also supported numerous charities, funding education, humanitarian causes, and even selling his iconic black Strat guitar in 2019 for charity, raising over $21 million, a gesture that showed he valued humanity above possessions, even the instrument that had shaped his identity. Through it all, David's playing remained unique. While many guitarists chased speed, complexity, or technical showmanship, Gilmour mastered the art of emotion. A single bend from him could bring tears. A single note could feel like a lifetime. He never needed thousands of notes to say what one perfectly placed tone could express. He became a champion not by overpowering but by connecting, by reaching deep into the hearts of listeners across generations. His soundtracks became the background to millions of lives, songs played at weddings, funerals, lonely nights, and moments of joy. He was not just a guitarist, he was a narrator of human emotion. As time passed, Pink Floyd's story closed. Their final studio work, The Endless River 2014, dedicated to the late Richard Wright, was a swan song. A floating farewell. David himself continued to tour occasionally, but he increasingly valued family, peace, and reflection. Unlike many rock stars who clung desperately to fame, Gilmour seemed content to let the music speak for him. He had nothing left to prove. He had already conquered stadiums, silenced critics, and written his name into eternity. The legacy of David Gilmour is not measured merely in records sold or awards won, though those are immense. It is measured in the universal recognition that his guitar playing embodies something eternal. His solos, Comfortably Numb, Shine on Your Crazy Diamond, Time, Echoes, are not simply performances, they are experiences. They take listeners out of themselves, lift them to places of beauty, reflection, and transcendence. He is proof that music is not just entertainment but a language beyond words, one that can carry sadness, joy, rage, peace, and hope in the space of a few minutes. His life teaches that greatness is not always about domination, noise, or ego. Sometimes, greatness is quiet, patient, and enduring, like the echo of a note that refuses to fade. David Gilmour's journey from a boy in Cambridge, busking for food on Parisian streets, to the guitarist of one of the greatest bands of all time, is a saga of resilience, humility, and artistry. He faced failures, humiliation, and battles that could have destroyed him. Yet he emerged not bitter but stronger, not arrogant but graceful. His revenge was not cruel but creative. His championship was not in trophies but in timeless notes that will outlive all of us. When history remembers Pink Floyd, it will remember Roger Waters' vision, Syd Barrett's madness, Richard Wright's atmosphere, Nick Mason's steady rhythm, but above all, it will remember the sound of David Gilmour's guitar, a voice of the human soul, eternal, unbroken, and victorious. And that, in the truest sense, makes him not just a musician, not just a survivor, but a champion whose legacy will echo as long as music exists. Trophy.